Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Now, before I get into the lesson this morning, let me remind you that Mike Sullivan and I haven't done a preterist apologetics show in about 2 weeks now. Uh, I had to be out of town. He pulled a muscle, pardon me, on his new job. Had to get some painkiller for that on another time. And so we haven't been able to be with you. And we've normally done that show on Friday evenings. Well, due to Mike's new job, that's very, very inconvenient. So, beginning today, all right, Wednesday, we will be doing Preterist Apologetics on Wednesday evenings. So be sure to join Mike Sullivan and me this evening, 6 o'clock Central Times, 7 o'clock Eastern Time for Preterist Apologetics. Now, on Friday, I'll be back with you, of course, as I continue my examination of the book Problems with Preterism by Brian Hodge. So be watchful for that. And, of course, be watching for my normal Now TV as well. So keep that in mind. It's important, all right? So, as I told you yesterday, I want to begin more of a deep dive into Succot and this harvest imagery. Yesterday, I shared with you that beginning in Matthew chapter 3, with John the Baptizer, who was the voice of one crying in the wilderness, who was the messenger of the covenant, who was Elijah. He came heralding and declaring that the harvest was there. The time had arrived for the harvest. Shared with you John chapter 4, verse 35, where Jesus said the time for the harvest had arrived. You know, some years ago, it really struck me how widespread the doctrine of harvest is in the New Testament. Sometimes in passages that do not use the word harvest, but what do they use? Well, let's say Christ has become the first fruits of those who had fallen asleep. That's Succot imagery. That is to say, that's harvest imagery. James chapter 1, verse 18, of his own will begat he us, that we should be a kind of first fruits unto God. That's Succot. That's harvest imagery. And on and on and on it goes. This is not accidental, and it's not coincidental. It is based upon the fact that the Jews believed, and Jesus taught, that the harvest was the eschatological climax, the resurrection harvest was to be the eschatological climax. Now keep in mind, folks, this is important. Matthew 3, John 4, John said, the time of the harvest had arrived 2,000 years ago. Okay? So we come to Matthew chapter 13, which is truly an absolutely foundational and pivotal passage when we come to discuss the doctrine of harvest and thus Succot. Now, I've shared with you that I was raised in the amillennial view of eschatology. I heard countless sermons on Matthew chapter 13. Invariably, it was posited as a parable about the end of the world. More specifically, it was described as a prediction and prophecy of the end of the current Christian age. And it didn't dawn on me for many, many years until I really began to struggle with my own eschatology, that I really began to ask some questions and say, well, wait a minute. Why is it that before Jesus ever even established the church or the Christian age, begin to talk about the end of the Christian age. What's the point? When I begin to realize, ladies and gentlemen, that the doctrine of the resurrection and the doctrine of the harvest, which are the same thing, were nothing but expressions of the hope of Old Covenant Israel found and promised in the Old Covenant. We find this, Isaiah chapter 27 and verse 12, in a passage that talks about Israel's death, but her resurrection through the Messiah at a time when the great trumpet would be blown for the great end gathering, the episynagoge, Isaiah 27, verse 12, verse 13, at the sounding of the great trumpet. This is Succot. This is the great harvest. That's the way the rabbis interpreted it. So, in Matthew chapter 13, I'm going to have to hurry here. In Matthew chapter 13, Jesus told this remarkable parable. Man went out and he sowed the seed. At the time of the harvest, he sent out his angels to gather, and they came to him and said, Master, the enemy has sown tares in the field. Should we go gather up the tares out of the wheat? And Jesus responded, said, No, let them both grow up together until the time of the harvest. Then gather out the tares first, and then gather my wheat into the barn. And the disciples asked, what does this mean? And Jesus said, well, the wicked and righteous are going to grow together until the end of the age. Then the Son of Man will send forth his angels and gather in the harvest. And the harvest is at the end of the age. So we are told unequivocally, undeniably, the harvest, that's the harvest, ladies and gentlemen, of Matthew chapter 3 that John was referring to when he said Christ's winnowing fork, the end of the harvest instrument, was already in Jesus's hand. It's the harvest of which Jesus was speaking in John chapter 4 when he said, lift up your eyes, the fields are ripe already unto the harvest. This is eschatological to the core, to the very foundation. And Jesus says that harvest will be at the end of the age. Now, the term that he uses here in the Greek is suntelia to aeoniou. I may have gotten the precise suffix wrong, but you get the point. This term is only found a handful of times in the New Testament. About 3 or 4 times, I forgot the exact count at the moment, but 3 or 4 times it's used in Matthew chapter 13, 39 through 43. And then again later in the chapter. Then it's used in Matthew chapter 24. And I want you to catch the power of what I'm about to share with you. Jesus predicted concerning the temple, not one stone shall be left standing on top of another. And the apostles, as they're leaving that temple, they begin to show him the size, the beauty, the glory of the stones of that temple. And Jesus says, do you not see these things? The time is coming in which not one stone shall be left standing on top of another. What an incredible prophecy. So the apostles immediately ask, tell us, when shall these things be? What shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Suntelia to aeoniou. It is not the end of the world. It is not the end of time. It is the end of the age. Now, here's what I want you to catch, ladies and gentlemen. I've posed this question many times. It is a question that I've got to tell you. When I pose this question to futurists, their response is, well, yes, Jesus' apostles linked in their mind, they associated the destruction of the temple with the end of time and the end of the Christian age. And I'm going, really? No, wait a minute. I used to believe that. I really did. I thought it made sense until I began to ask myself the question, wait a minute. Number one, it's the end of the age. Number two, why would Jesus and why would the apostles link the destruction of the Jerusalem temple to the end of the Christian age and the end of time? Where is that connection? Number three, ask yourself the question, directly corollary to the previous questions, what age did that Jerusalem temple represent? You cannot make the Jerusalem temple symbolic of, representative of the end of the Christian age. That is, you can't make the destruction of that temple representative of the end of the Christian age, which, by the way, has no end. After all, the Bible says the rule and the reign of Christ on the throne of David has no end. So how are you going to have the destruction of that temple representative of the end of the Christian age? An age is a time period. So how are you going to have the end of time at the destruction of a temple which represented a certain period of time, i.e., the age of Moses and the law? End of time is not the end of the Christian age. The Christian age has no end. So, when we ask ourselves the question, what age did the Jerusalem temple represent? And therefore, what age were the apostles asking about and its end? To suggest that the apostles mistakenly, confusedly, ignorantly linked the destruction of that temple with the end of time interjects something into the context and the discussion which is absolutely not there. Now, I've written a book entitled Watching for the Parousia, Were Jesus' Apostles Confused or Were They Ignorant or whatever? Look, folks, in the great majority of commentators today, amillennial, postmillennial, premillennial, it is taken for granted that the apostles linked the destruction of Jerusalem in their mind to the end of time and the end of the Christian age. They were just confused. They're a bunch of dummies. No, I suggest that the people that are confused are the people who are claiming that the destruction of Jerusalem was not linked to the end of the age. And I suggest to you, as I develop it in that book, Watching for the Parousia, Were Jesus' Apostles Confused? And by the way, for those of you who have contacted me just recently, reading the book, recommending the book, complimenting the book, thank you so very much. But here's the point, again, ladies and gentlemen. The apostles, based on the Old Testament, based on Isaiah 24 through 27, based on Isaiah 65 through 66, based on Daniel chapter 12, they had every right in the world. They had every scriptural right and justification to link the destruction of that Jerusalem temple to the end of the age, not the end of time. next Monday, when we return to Matthew chapter 13, I've just used this as a launching pad this morning, as you're obviously aware of. I'm going to dig deeper into Matthew chapter 13 and to show you that the Old Testament background and source of Matthew chapter 13 proves unequivocally that the Old Testament predicted the harvest at the end of the Old Covenant age, having nothing whatsoever to do with the end of time or the end of the Christian age. Now, I developed that extensively in this book, all right? I have an extensive discussion of the significance of Matthew chapter 13 and the harvest as the fulfillment of Succot. And don't forget, I've got these two books on special for the rest of November 2024, U.S. orders only. Go to my website, donkpreston.com. Beautiful banner right up at the very top. Click on the banner, order these two books. You're going to save $20. How about that? Great way to end this year getting some great resources. Okay, I'm out of time. See you tonight for Preterist Apologetics with Mike Sullivan.